Do you believe some mysteries should remain buried? That there are secrets so dark they defy the sanity of anyone who dares uncover them? Today, I'll tell you the story of Nathaniel Carter, a priest devoted to the Vatican, whose quest for truth led him into the depths of a conspiracy spanning centuries. A mystery so profound that it threatens the very faith he swore to protect. But what Nathaniel found wasn't just a secret. It was a doorway to true terror. Welcome to another night where mysteries never sleep. I'm Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before diving into this story filled with chilling revelations, remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep exploring the most hidden secrets for you. Ready to discover what lurks in the shadows? The Black Letter. Nathaniel Carter was a devout priest with years of service to the Catholic Church. His role as a researcher in the Vatican Apostolic Library was both an honor and a reflection of his faith. The classic scenario, a guy blending faith with academic curiosity. Always seems like a good idea, until the first sign of trouble, right? He spent his days among ancient scrolls and rare manuscripts, immersed in the history of the Church. To Nathaniel, knowledge wasn't just an intellectual pursuit, but an act of devotion. However, he could never have imagined that one day the Vatican itself would become the stage for his greatest fears. It all began on a typical October afternoon in 2015. Nathaniel was sorting through a batch of old documents when he noticed an unusual envelope on his desk. It was black, sealed with wax bearing a peculiar symbol, an eye encircled by a serpent biting its own tail. The weight and rustic finish of the envelope seemed out of place. When he touched it, a strange sensation ran through him, as though he was about to cross an invisible boundary. The priest hesitated for a few minutes before opening the envelope. Inside, he found a note written in archaic Latin. The message was brief but unsettling. He who seeks the truth must be prepared to face the darkness that guards it. Seek the Liber Nigri Congregationis in the prohibited register. Trust no one. He read the words several times, each repetition deepening his unease. What was this book? And who could have sent this message? Nathaniel tried to dismiss the content as a cruel prank. However, the precision of the Latin and the symbolism of the seal suggested otherwise. Unwillingly, curiosity was planted in his heart. After all, he was familiar with the prohibited register, a catalog of texts deemed heretical or dangerous to the faith. The Liber Nigri Congregationis wasn't familiar to him, but something about the message awakened a need to know more. That night, as he tried to sleep, Nathaniel couldn't get the symbol out of his mind. The serpent seemed alive in his thoughts, coiling and tightening around him with an invisible grip. The content of the message echoed like a warning, yet also like an irresistible invitation. He knew investigating the prohibited register was a risk, but not investigating seemed equally dangerous. Little did he know that his decision would lead him down a path of no return. The following morning, Nathaniel headed to the Vatican's archives with a mix of apprehension and determination. The silence of the corridors amplified his footsteps as he approached the restricted section of the prohibited register. He had no idea that, by crossing that threshold, he was stepping directly into the serpent's gaze. Investigations in the prohibited register. The Vatican's secret archives were a sanctuary of knowledge and secrecy. The room housing the prohibited register radiated an almost physical weight, as though the books and scrolls there carried centuries of secrets and sacrilege. Nathaniel entered cautiously, feeling the cold floor echo beneath his feet. The silence was absolute, unsettling, as if time itself hesitated to touch this place. The shelves, filled with chained volumes, seemed to watch the priest as he moved forward. Each book bore a silent warning on its aged cover. Do not touch without permission. Nathaniel scanned the records, his hands moving quickly but carefully over the yellowed pages. After an hour of searching, he found an enigmatic entry, Liber Nigri Congregationis, cited as a text incompatible with Christian doctrine and potentially dangerous. The last recorded retrieval was in 1962 by Cardinal Augustine Lemoyne. Nathaniel was intrigued. The register not only indicated that the book had never been returned, but also included a handwritten note, missing along with the cardinal. Potential involvement in prohibited practices. It was a detail he couldn't ignore. As he absorbed this information, a faint sound broke his concentration. It sounded like a whisper, distant and indistinct, but present enough to make him look up. The hall, previously empty, now felt alive, as if shadows had subtly shifted position. Nathaniel shook his head, trying to dismiss the sensation of being watched. Back in his office, he researched more about Lemoyne. He discovered that the cardinal was a conservative theologian, fervently opposed to the changes proposed during the Second Vatican Council. However, later reports suggested he had become reclusive and obsessed with heretical texts. The mystery surrounding his sudden disappearance fueled dark rumors. When he closed the last book, Nathaniel felt that presence again. Look, invisible presence, strange noises. If he hasn't realized he's being watched by now, he'll need a neon sign to understand. It was as if something invisible was observing him, tracking his investigation. The sound of furniture lightly shifting echoed from the next room. He stood abruptly but found nothing but harmless shadows. Still, he decided to leave, as the atmosphere felt stifling. Every step away from the office seemed heavier, as though something wanted to keep him there. Strange presences and the first contact with the congregation. The days following his investigation brought an increasing sense of unease for Nathaniel. During Mass, he noticed lingering glances from some colleagues. Perhaps they were just paranoia, but the persistence of these moments unsettled him. At night, he would wake suddenly, his heart racing, convinced that something was watching him. Every shadow in his room seemed deeper, more charged with hidden intentions. One afternoon, while walking through the Vatican corridors, he saw a hooded figure at the end of a long hallway. The figure stood still, a silhouette wrapped in darkness. Nathaniel froze, his heart pounding. When he blinked, the figure vanished as if it had never been there. The episode left him shaken but also determined. The feeling of being hunted was now undeniable. As he discreetly investigated, he found references to a group called the Congregation of Darkness. It was mentioned in old documents as a secret society infiltrated within the church. The information was fragmented, but rumors included dark practices, a mysterious leader known as the Black Pope, and the disappearance of several clergymen over the centuries. A new point of tension arose when, upon returning to his office, he found an object that hadn't been there before, a black medallion. Engraved on it was the same symbol that appeared on the initial envelope's seal. Touching the medallion made his skin tingle, as if it carried a strange energy. He kept the object, but couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching him while he was away. The apparitions continued. One night, he heard light footsteps in the corridor outside his room. Peeking through the slightly open door, he saw the hooded figure again. This time, it stopped and slowly turned its head, as if aware of his presence. Nathaniel slammed the door shut and recited a prayer, trying to stave off the growing terror. He knew this was more than paranoia. Something, or someone, was surrounding him. The discovery of Lemoyne's letters. After days of relentless research, Nathaniel finally found a set of letters from Cardinal Augustine Lemoyne in the historical archives. The correspondence had been catalogued innocuously, but as he read them, he realized they concealed something much deeper. In the early letters, Lemoyne wrote about theological issues and internal debates during the Second Vatican Council. However, as the years passed, the tone of the letters changed drastically. In one letter, dated October 1962, Lemoyne wrote, "There are forces dwelling beneath St. Peter's dome that should not exist." And he writes that so calmly. "Forces that shouldn't exist is reason enough to flee. I've seen things that defy my faith and reason itself. If I continue investigating, I fear for my fate." These words resonated with Nathaniel as a warning. It was clear that Lemoyne had discovered something that terrified him, yet he continued his search. Another letter, sent to a close colleague, explicitly mentioned a congregation of darkness. Lemoyne described it as a group infiltrated into the highest echelons of the church, dedicated to practices completely contradicting Christian teachings. He also mentioned the Liber Nigri Congregationists as a key to understanding the sinister objectives of this organization. The tone of the letter was desperate, almost as if he knew his time was running out. As Nathaniel read these letters, he began to feel again that he was not alone. The air in his office felt heavier, and he thought he heard faint whispers, as if someone were murmuring in Latin. He looked around but saw nothing. Still, the feeling of being watched was inescapable. He tried to ignore it and focus on the text, but his attention was constantly diverted by noises and shadows that shouldn't have been there. At the end of the readings, Nathaniel found a specific reference that caught his attention. Lemoyne mentioned a place called Sublimina, a secret room within the Vatican's underground tunnels. It was there, he claimed, that many of the congregation's secrets were hidden. Nathaniel felt a mix of fear and determination. If there was a chance to find answers, he knew he had to follow this lead. With the letters in hand, Nathaniel decided to return to the historical archive to seek more information about Sublimina. However, upon returning the next day, he discovered that some of the letters had disappeared. He searched the area but found nothing. This only reinforced his suspicion that someone was trying to cover up what he had discovered. The urgency grew, and Nathaniel felt he was racing against time. The first direct threat. After the disappearance of Lemoyne's letters, Nathaniel remained in constant alert. The idea that someone was tracking his every step was now a certainty. He began to distrust everyone around him, scrutinizing even his closest colleagues. Still, he did not give up. His next mission was to locate the mysterious room mentioned in the letters, Sublimina. To do so, he decided to consult old Vatican architectural records in the hope of finding some reference. While leafing through ancient blueprints and technical documents, Nathaniel received an unexpected visitor. A young seminarian named Pietro discreetly approached him. With a pale face and visibly nervous demeanor, Pietro handed him a small folded note and whispered, "Father, they know what you're doing. Be careful." Before Nathaniel could ask anything, the seminarian left hastily, leaving him even more unsettled. The note read simply, "Trust no one." That night, Nathaniel decided to review all his files for inconsistencies. Opening the drawer where he had kept the black medallion he had found earlier, he realized it was no longer there. He searched the entire office but could not find the object. He knew this was not a careless mistake on his part. Someone had invaded his space, further confirming his belief that he was being closely watched. While trying to calm himself and organize his thoughts, he heard a loud noise coming from the hallway. It was the sound of footsteps, but when he went to check, there was no one there. Returning to his office, Nathaniel found something that made his blood run cold. On his desk lay a new black medallion, identical to the previous one, but this time accompanied by a note with a clear message: "Stop now. You are not safe." The threat was direct, and he knew he had crossed a dangerous line. Despite the fear consuming him, Nathaniel felt compelled to continue. He knew he was close to the truth, and to give up would mean accepting terror as a permanent part of his life. He stored the medallion and note in a safe place, and decided he had to act quickly. The congregation was aware of his investigation, but he would not let that deter him. Something much larger was at stake, something he felt it was his duty to uncover. The next day, he found a reference in the architectural map that seemed to correspond to the location mentioned in Lemoyne's letters. The Sublimina room was marked in a subterranean section of St. Peter's Basilica, in one of the least accessed corridors. Determined to find answers, Nathaniel prepared to descend into the depths of the Vatican that very night. He knew that from this moment onward, he was risking not only his life but possibly his soul. Lemoyne's map and the Sublimina door. Just before midnight, Nathaniel descended through the dim corridors leading to the catacombs beneath St. Peter's Basilica. He carried with him a flashlight, a rosary, and Lemoyne's remaining letters. Each step seemed to echo throughout the tunnel, as if the very walls were alive and aware of his movements. The air was damp and heavy, laden with an ancient smell that seemed to blend dust, stone, and something metallic. He knew he was nearing something dangerous. The map indicated that the Sublimina room lay beyond a concealed passage marked by a worn cross carved into the wall. After about half an hour of exploring the tunnels, Nathaniel found the symbol. With a careful push, the wall slid open, revealing a narrow corridor that ended in a black door. The door was covered in Latin inscriptions, along with the symbol of the eye and serpent that had haunted him from the beginning. Nathaniel shuddered as he studied the door. In the center was an inscription that read, "He who enters must accept the weight of truth." Taking a deep breath, he uttered the words in Latin mentioned on the map, "Ad umbras clausa." With a chilling creak, the door slowly opened, revealing the Sublimina room. What he saw inside made his breath stop. The room was circular, with walls covered in inscriptions that seemed to be a mix of Latin and symbols Nathaniel didn't recognize. In the center stood an altar of black marble, worn by time and stained with what he suspected was blood. Black candles arranged in circles dimly illuminated the space, casting shadows that seemed to dance. Resting on the altar was a book, its black leather cover embossed with the symbol he now associated with the congregation. As he approached the altar, Nathaniel felt an overwhelming presence, as though something unseen was watching his every move. He reached out to touch the book, but before he could open it, he heard a sound coming from the corridor. It was footsteps, quick and heavy, drawing closer. Without thinking twice, he grabbed the book and hid it under his tunic, ready to face whoever was coming. Before he could leave, two hooded men entered the room. They stopped upon seeing him, and for a moment, there was a deadly silence. Then one of them spoke in a low, menacing voice. "You shouldn't be here, Father." Nathaniel tried to step back, but the men quickly advanced, blocking his exit. He knew he was trapped, and whatever would happen next could very well be the end of his journey, or worse, his life. The congregation's ritual. Nathaniel was taken to an underground hall, where the oppressive air carried a sense of sacrilege. The space was dimly lit by black candles arranged in intricate patterns. The shadows cast seemed alive, moving in time with the Latin chants that filled the room. In the center, a black marble altar held a grotesquely beating human heart. Nathaniel, bound and forced to watch, felt terror consume him. Elias Romano, now without his hood, walked to the altar with a cold expression of authority. "Father Carter," he said with a chilling smile, "you've stepped into our world, and now you will be part of it." His words were both a warning and a sentence. Elias began reciting a prayer that sounded like a profanation, while the hooded figures around him repeated the words in unison. Nathaniel struggled against his bonds, but fear paralyzed him. The room seemed to vibrate with a supernatural energy, and he knew he was in the presence of something terrifyingly real. As the ritual reached its climax, Elias raised a golden chalice and, with a dagger, pierced the heart on the altar. A dark liquid dripped into the chalice, which was then brought to Nathaniel. "Drink," Elias commanded, "and see what true faith can reveal." Nathaniel tried to resist, but the hooded figures held him down. The bitter liquid was poured into his mouth, and immediately he felt as though he was being pulled into an abyss. Visions flooded his mind, writhing shadows, glowing eyes in the darkness, and a giant figure on a throne made of bones. He heard Elias's laughter as his vision faded and the world around him crumbled. The mark in the black book. When Nathaniel regained consciousness, he was alone. The hall was empty, the altar clean, and the candles extinguished as if the ritual had never occurred. But he knew it was real. The mark on his chest, burning like fire, was proof enough. Slowly, he realized he was still holding the black book he had taken from the Sublimina room. Despite his terror, he knew he couldn't leave it behind. It was his only evidence against the congregation. Back in his room, Nathaniel locked the door and opened the book. Its pages were filled with descriptions of rituals, names of influential members of the congregation, and symbols that seemed to pulse with an energy of their own. He recognized some of the names as prominent figures within the church, including Elias Romano. But what truly terrified him were the references to recent dates. This meant the congregation's activities weren't just ancient history, they were ongoing. Removing his tunic to bathe, Nathaniel noticed something strange on his body. Over his heart, there was a mark that hadn't been there before. It was the same symbol of the eye encircled by the serpent, etched into his skin as if it had been burned. He scrubbed frantically, but the mark didn't fade. It seemed alive, faintly pulsing with every beat of his heart. Fear consumed him. He knew this wasn't just a physical mark, but a scar left by the congregation. A reminder that he was now part of something much larger and far more dangerous. Nathaniel tried to pray, but the words felt hollow, as though his connection to the divine had been severed. Each prayer was interrupted by whispers echoing in Latin, voices that invaded his mind. In the days that followed, Nathaniel noticed changes in himself. His nightmares became more vivid, and he began to see shadows moving in his peripheral vision. People around him seemed different, as if they knew what had happened. Some looked at him with pity, others with suspicion, but no one said anything. He tried seeking help from a trusted priest, but the man avoided him, as though he knew Nathaniel now carried something unclean. Even so, Nathaniel decided he had to continue his quest. He knew the book held answers, but it also attracted danger. There was something about it that called to him, compelling him to read it even as he felt it pulling him deeper into darkness. The mark on his chest seemed to burn whenever he touched the book, as if the two were inseparably linked. Then he realized he had crossed a boundary from which there was no return. The door of laments. The discovery of the book and the mark on his chest had turned Nathaniel into a haunted man. He knew he couldn't trust anyone, but the urgency for answers drove him forward. In the book, he found references to a place called the Door of Laments, described as a portal to the congregation's deepest secrets. The text spoke of rituals performed there and truths that could shake the foundations of faith. Determined to understand what he was facing, Nathaniel decided to locate this mysterious door. The following days were spent deciphering clues from the book. There were crudely drawn maps, descriptions of secret passages, and mentions of symbols that served as keys. One such key was the black medallion he had found earlier, now missing. He began exploring the Vatican's subterranean tunnels and corridors, often concealing his presence to avoid suspicion. Each step brought him closer to an unknown territory where shadows seemed to come alive. Finally, Nathaniel found what he believed to be the entrance to the Door of Laments. It was a stone arch hidden behind a tapestry in a rarely used corridor. Carved into the arch was the same symbol now marking his chest, the eye encircled by the serpent. Beneath it, in Latin, were the words, "He who crosses this door does not return the same." It's practically a tutorial on how not to live. You read that and still decide to go in. You're asking to become a hallway legend. He hesitated, but knew there was no turning back. He pushed the door, which opened with a heavy sound, revealing a staircase descending deep into the earth. The steps seemed endless, and the air grew thicker with every descent. When he reached the bottom, he found himself in a vast room, dimly lit by embers glowing in iron receptacles. The walls were covered in inscriptions in Latin mixed with arcane symbols. At the center stood a black altar, similar to the one he had seen before but much larger. Around the altar, chairs arranged in a circle suggested that this was a meeting place. Nathaniel explored the room, trying to absorb everything he saw. On the altar, inscriptions mentioned the Black Pope as both spiritual and earthly leader of the congregation. There were also references to sacrifices made in the name of a higher power, a sleeping god whose essence resided beneath the Vatican. With each discovery, Nathaniel felt an increasing weight on his shoulders. He knew that exposing all this would not only risk his life, but also shake the very structure of the church. While investigating, he heard footsteps. They came from the corridor through which he had descended. Nathaniel knew he wouldn't have time to escape. He hid behind one of the room's columns and saw 3 hooded figures enter, murmuring among themselves. They carried objects that seemed to be part of a ritual, a chalice, a dagger, and a book similar to the one he had found. Nathaniel held his breath, but he knew he would be discovered sooner or later. The connection to the Black Pope. Nathaniel woke alone in the hall, now empty. The candles had been extinguished, and the altar was clean, as if the ritual had never taken place. But he knew it was real. The mark on his chest, burning like fire, was proof. He opened his tunic and saw the symbol that had haunted him from the start, the eye encircled by the serpent. The mark seemed to pulse with its own life, a constant reminder that he was now tied to the congregation. Determined to investigate further, he found a name in the Black Book that left him terrified. Elias Romano was merely an intermediary. The true leader of the congregation, the Black Pope, remained in the shadows, orchestrating events. You already know the final villain is serious trouble when his title includes black. Brace for heavy prayers. Other references pointed to an even larger conspiracy, with the names of cardinals and clergy close to the Pope, including Dom Victor Renaud. As he read, Nathaniel again heard footsteps coming from the corridor. This time, he didn't try to flee. He hid the book and waited, trying to steady his breath. A figure entered, hooded, but said nothing. It simply stood there, watching him. The air grew heavy, and Nathaniel felt as though his soul was being laid bare. When the figure finally left, he knew he had crossed a line of no return. Now Nathaniel understood that his fight wasn't just against the congregation, but against time. The Black Pope seemed aware of his every move, and the constant feeling of being watched became a relentless torment. He had to act, but he knew he was approaching a confrontation that would require more than courage. Nathaniel's transformation and loss of control. After that night, Nathaniel became a changed man. He bore not only the weight of what he knew, but also the visible mark on his body and the constant sensation of being watched. The chants he had heard during the rituals began to echo in his mind, even when he was alone. His prayers brought no comfort, and the presence of the Black Book in his possession seemed to fill his room with an oppressive energy. He tried to seek help from other priests, but no one seemed willing to listen. Some avoided him entirely, while others gave him suspicious looks, as if they knew something. With each passing day, Nathaniel felt more isolated, as if the Vatican itself was rejecting him. He knew he was marked, not just physically but spiritually. The congregation had left something inside him, something he didn't know how to remove. The nightmares became more intense. He dreamed of Elias Romano, the Black Altar, and the pulsating heart he had seen during the rituals. In his visions, he saw himself participating in the chants, even though he knew it was impossible. He began to question his sanity, fearing that the congregation's darkness was slowly taking over his soul. The mark on his chest seemed to pulse every time he touched the book, as if the two were inextricably linked. Nathaniel knew he had to act, but he was out of options. He couldn't expose the congregation without concrete evidence, and even if he could, who would believe him? The names he had seen in the book included some of the most powerful men in the church, and challenging them meant risking his life. Still, he felt he couldn't simply flee. Somehow, he knew he was destined to face this until the end. One night, while in his room, he heard a familiar whisper. It was a low voice repeating his name in Latin. Nathaniel, venite ad numbers. When he turned, he saw a shadow in the corner of the room, larger and denser than any other. It seemed alive, pulsating with the same energy he felt in the book. Nathaniel froze, unable to move or speak, as the shadow slowly approached him. That night, Nathaniel realized his battle wasn't just against the congregation, but against something within himself. He had become part of that world, even against his will. Now he knew his only option was to seek a final confrontation with the congregation, even if it cost him his soul. The fear was constant, but his determination to uncover the truth was greater. He knew the worst was yet to come. Nathaniel believed that faith could illuminate any darkness. But what he found in the depths of the Vatican was an evil that transcends humanity, a conspiracy that threatens not only his life but his soul. Now, with the weight of his discovery, he prepares for the final confrontation, and what he finds there may forever change how the world views faith and power. This story is just a piece in one day. Perhaps you'll see the entire puzzle. If this made you think as well, subscribe and like the video. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share it. After all, more voices mean more discoveries. If you've made it this far, it's because something in this mystery captivated you. But I bet you haven't seen everything yet. Click on the next videos now to continue your journey into the unknown. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe so you don't miss the next secrets I'm about to reveal. But be careful. Once you step inside, there's no turning back.